Excellent, excellent. Great. My name is Sandras. I'm the CEO and founder of Startup Circus, which is a practical business school for entrepreneurs. And today we're so excited to having a conversation with David Heinemeier Hansson, DHH. He's an incredible man. He's the CTO and co-founder of Basecamp. He's the man that created Ruby on Rails and just also takes part. He participates in racing. Like, how does he do all of that? He won the Le Mans racing competition. Then he won so many other amazing awards for his contribution to computer science programming. So super excited, and I'd like to also introduce Lelemba. Lemba is an investor from Africa Trust Group and Enigma Ventures, and she's the one who's going to do the interview. And Delemba has worked I've worked for the public sector, private sector, was MD of Zona, Zambia, and Malawi, and now she invests in women businesses in Southern Africa. Lelemba, I'll leave it to you to take it away with DHH.
Thank you, Sandras. Thank you so much, DHH, for making time to be with us today. I guess we can start right from the beginning. You grew up in Denmark. What was that like? Did you see your life turning out the way it has? Tell us about growing up in Denmark.
Sure. Well, I think the best way to recount that experience is to contrast it with the life I've had in the United States for the past 15 years. Because growing up in Denmark in it's funny, I was thinking even just a class consciousness of which class you grow up in is a bit of a foreign concept in Denmark. I think Denmark has one of the smallest spans in sort of a class hierarchy in terms of incomes across the whole population. So you don't even think so much about it. And I certainly didn't, even though when I grew up later, came to realize, oh, actually, even for Danish standards, we weren't that well off. We would run out of money before the end of the month. We would have a bunch of things to deal with. And yet I, as a child in that society, could grow up and do all the things I wanted to do. I didn't feel any significant limitations from that. I grew up, I got a great education by the Danish educational system, both through primary and middle schools, high school, and all the way on to the Copenhagen Business School that I graduated from. And the same thing with medical care. I needed things when I was a child. I had bad hearing and I needed a couple of operations. Never something that you were made to think of, oh, where's my station in society? And my main reference point now is the United States after having lived there for 15 years. And I could very well see that my life would have been incredibly different if I had grown up at the same station I did in Denmark in the United States. Things might not have turned out the way they did. So I'm incredibly thankful for being so privileged to grow up in a society like Denmark where these things are just taken care of. And it's also one of the things that has made me such a fierce evangelist for essentially socially democratic principles. This idea that upward mobility and for children to be able to grow up and grow into the kinds of people they can on the strength of who they are, not who they were born to. So that is kind of my reference frame. And I think I brought a lot of that to the United States, including how we run our company at Basecamp, run it in a way that is inspired by everything I saw growing up in Denmark, including things like how we work and how long we work. When I grew up in Denmark, I never knew anyone personally who wanted to work 80 hours a week. Really? Like that was simply not even a concept. I never met anyone like that. The whole idea that a 40-hour work week is a good constraint and that's enough time that you can build not only valuable companies, but fulfilling companies and do well by your employees was really hammered into me. So when I came to the US, and particularly in the tech industry, saw that everyone was running around like headless chickens, chasing ever more hours, ever more sacrifice. I thought, this is strange. I can't relate to this at all. And we ended up building a company that was very much in opposition to that, very much in the European, if not outright Scandinavian spirit of work, that work is not all there is to life, and that putting some constraints on how much time you invest in it is actually good for you, not just good for you as a person and as a life, but can help you become a better business person, can help you become a better practitioner of whatever your craft is. For me, it was programming. For Jason, it was design. This idea of letting you be influenced and inspired by other things than just your work, I think is a key important. So those are some of the inspirations I've had from growing up in Denmark. Ironically, I'm back in, I don't know if it's ironic, but I am actually back in Denmark right now. I've been here for the last few months when the pandemic hit and the United States shut down. Denmark was doing very well with the pandemic, and we have kids that are in school. So being able to come to Denmark, at least for a while, and have kids in school was very important. Now, unfortunately, the pandemic isn't going very well in Denmark anymore either. But anyway, we'd had several good months here. So,
so fast forward a little bit. Speaking about Basecamp, how did you meet your co-founder, Jason Freet? How did that come about?
It came about from me being in Denmark at the turn of the century in 2001. I had been a fan of at that time, the company was called 37 Signals. The 37 Signals was a design shop that did design for hire, a consulting company. And it had the weirdest homepage. It was a design company, and the homepage was all text. There was no big flourishes. At the time, it was very common to have like Flash or other just big design elements that looked very special. And here it was, the 37 Signals website was 37 positions on design, on the industry, and so on. And I just thought, this is fascinating. A design company that doesn't do graphics, how does that even compute? So I'd been following the company for some time. And when Jason Freet, who was one of the original founders of 37 Signals, posted a question to the weblog Signal v Noise, a weblog that's still going today, 21 years later. Jason posted a question to the weblog about learning how to program PHP. I didn't know Jason. Jason didn't know me. I had just been reading the blog. I wrote him an email not out of the blue. He was asking for help, but I wrote him this long email explaining how to solve his problem. And we started trading emails back and forth, and he ultimately decided it was easier to hire me than it was to learn how to program. So we started working together. We started collaborating on client projects together. And then a couple of years later, 2 years later, in fact, 2003, we started working on Basecamp, the project management software that we still run today. It is the heart of the company, and built that together over the next 6 months or so, released that in 2004. And then at the end of 2005, Basecamp was taking off and I was finished with my studies. So I decided to move to the United States and join the company as a partner.
Right. And when you guys started Basecamp, you didn't raise any money and you turned down over 100 investors. Can you tell us about that? That's not typical, particularly in the US.
No, indeed not. We started Basecamp as a side project. I'm a huge fan of side projects. Side projects are a way to dramatically reduce the risk of anything that you do. We had a successful consulting company. Well, Jason had a successful consulting company. I just had myself. I was a freelancer, but things were going well enough. And we had room to carve out some time during the week to work on our own thing. So that's what we did. When we started Basecamp and I started doing the technical work for it, I was working 15 hours a week on Basecamp. I was spending the rest of my time either doing other client work or going to school. And that allowed us to essentially build Basecamp with just our own, first of all, our own talents and our own money. Because we didn't need to cover our expenses. We didn't need to cover our salaries. We did that through the consulting work. So it gave us the freedom to, first of all, just do what we wanted to do on the timeline we wanted to do it. And then ultimately the freedom to set the course of the business, which has turned out to be absolutely pivotal. There's very little chance, I think, that I would still have been working at Basecamp here almost 20 years later if we had taken venture capital back then, because that is usually not what happens.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if it was quite 100. I think the count, we were somewhere between 40 and 50 VCs had reached out. A couple of other large companies reached out to sort of do acquisition, and we weren't interested in any of it because we didn't need it. By the time we started working full time on Basecamp, Basecamp could pay all our salaries. In fact, we launched Basecamp in 2004. It was a quite successful launch at the time. Within 3 weeks, we were doing as much revenue as we thought we were going to do after a year.
Oh, wow.
And still, we took at least 18 months before we felt secure enough to essentially let go of our consulting business, because that was the time when we could pay our own, at the time, fairly humble salaries in tech standards, and dedicate our time to it full time. So at no time did we really run a big risk. There's this huge myth in entrepreneurship that all the big entrepreneurs, like, they're the risk takers, the one that bet everything. Either they bet their own money and they've maxed out all their credit cards and they've taken out a third mortgage, or that they're betting other people's money and they're betting big. They raise millions of dollars and they hire as fast as they can and they try to reach hyper growth as quickly as possible, because that is the path of venture capital. That is how you provide returns within 5 to 7 years that can pay for a whole fund, which is what that entire model is around. We weren't interested in that. I wasn't interested in that. So we took a different, slower path that ultimately might have taken a little longer to get started, but ended up in a place that today has a business that is throwing off tens of millions of dollars a year in profits. We control all of it. We don't have to answer to anyone. And that has allowed us to stay true, not only to our vision for what we wanted to build, but for our values for how we wanted to build it, and to stay small. That's the other thing. Most of the tech companies coming out of the US are in a death race to become a unicorn as quickly as possible, to be worth $1 billion, or preferably, in the eyes of their investors, die trying.
Yeah.
We weren't interested in dying trying. We weren't interested in being someone else's lottery coupons. We were interested in getting the best possible odds for building a great, sustainable business, and leave the unicorn race to other people.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And it seems you've also built quite a unique culture as well. I think you touched on taking from some of your Scandinavian roots into building that culture. Do you still, after these years, still work normal hours? You guys take vacations? How does it work in Basecamp now? Have you maintained that?
Yes, very much so. I think it's funny, whenever we talk about how we run the company today, most observers, especially in the US, they assume automatically that this is a luxury that we can now afford because we're successful. And of course, in the early days of the business, we must have worked ourselves to death, because that is the standard myth of entrepreneurship that is prevalent in the United States. But as we just talked about, our origin story for Basecamp was the opposite. We used to work less, when, at least on Basecamp the business, than we do today. And so for us to maintain the current level of work has been quite easy. The company was born in far less work. We gave birth to Basecamp on 15 hours a week of technical work from my end. So when I suddenly had 40 hours a week, it felt like I had all the time in the world. What would I do with all this time? So we continue that to this day. Not only do we work 40-hour weeks normally, in the summer, we actually work 32-hour weeks. We take the Fridays off. We have extremely generous vacation policies by American standards, although not particularly so from Danish standards. I think the Danish standard is 6 weeks of paid vacation every year. We're probably, once you add it all up, maybe 7 weeks or something at Basecamp. But the standard in the United States is often as little as 2 weeks. So we're trying to do that. And part of the reason why we're not trying to squeeze everyone out, trying to squeeze as much time out of all employees as we can, is that we're not in a sprint. We've been doing this for almost 20 years. This is a marathon. We hope to go another 20 years. There's no possible way where you can squeeze people for 40 years.
Yeah.
That doesn't work. You can maybe squeeze people for 2 years, 3 years, I don't know, maybe even 5 years. And then they may end up so squeezed that they burn out and they're miserable. But hey, either the company then became a unicorn or it didn't, and you achieved your objective. That wasn't our mission. That was never our goal. Our goal was to stick with it, to build something that was sustainable, that was calm, that was enduring. And these principles and these goals are simply not compatible with the normal tech approach that people, particularly in the United States, take when they build companies. They build companies in a very disposable manner. And we weren't interested in disposable companies, and we weren't interested in disposable people either. And I think it really just permutates through everything we think about. I'm incredibly proud of the fact that we have quite a few employees at Basecamp now who've been with us in tech terms would seem like an eternity for more than 10 years, because they haven't needed to take a break, so to speak, right? Because they were being burned out. Every 3 years at Basecamp, we encourage everyone to take a 1-month sabbatical. Just this year, actually, I took because I hadn't taken one sabbatical for the past 14 years, I took a 2-month sabbatical. And taking time away from work is one of the, in my opinion, best ways to gain perspective, gain the big picture and the long view. So this idea that you have to invest everything you got all the time for as long as it takes until the company's quote unquote sort of a unicorn or a mega success is just bunk. I think you get much better out of people creatively, humanly, if you don't take this view that they have to be squeezed. If you take a view of like, how would you set it up if you had to do this for 30 years? Not saying everyone will work at Basecamp for 30 years. I don't know if I'll even make it to 30 years. But if you think about it like that, what would it take for me to be able to go for 30 years? Well, I probably wouldn't want to work in such a way that I couldn't have any hobbies, that I couldn't see my family, that I couldn't have any friends, that I couldn't work out, that I couldn't stay healthy. All these things that the entrepreneurial myth in the United States encourages you to sacrifice while you're building your business. And then they tell you, oh, no, it's okay. You can sacrifice 5, 7, 10 years of your life in this crunch mode where it's all about business, because then you will land in a place where there's a pot of gold and you can retire and you can be happy. And it doesn't turn out that way, right? First of all, most people who have built or spent the last 10 years of their life building up work habits that require them to work 80, 90, 100 hours a week, they can't snap out of that. They become addicted to those habits. So even when they no longer have to do so, they continue to do so. So in my perspective, they end up damaging themselves in long-term ways that they can't just snap out of. And why would you want to do that? Isn't the whole point of building a business to end up in a place where you at least can see some leisure, some fruits of your labor, some way of being able to enjoy it? Anyway.
Yeah, I hear you, and it is quite a myth, as you say. And so for you, what do you think, apart from like unsustainable work ethics, what are some of the mistakes that early stage startups just tend to make that just hamper their longevity, apart from working like crazy? What else? What other mistakes are?
I think you used the word ethics, and I think that is actually a key point that's now finally coming to the forefront, that ethics, doing the right thing, is something that matters. And if you continuously put that down the list of priorities, that, you know what, doing the right thing is something, a luxury that you cannot afford in the beginning. That's something you do when you have all the money in the world. You end up in exactly the same places we were just talking about with the habits. If you build a company that has no ethics, like Facebook, like Uber, like most of the big American tech so-called successes that come out on the other side are worth a tremendous amount of money, but have no ethics in the sense that they are not doing the right thing by most people most of the time, you can't revert that. You set the trajectory for your company in the early days. You set the ethical blueprint that is going to leave the mark on the company for the long term. When you create a company in the image of Mark Zuckerberg, where anyone who thinks of privacy is a sucker, and why would those dumb fucks give him their data, as he would say in the early days, that leaves an imprint on the company that will persevere, right? And we can see that now. So ethics is not something you can opt into later. It's not a luxury you can pull down from the shelf. And I think that there's an absolutely a correlation between a lack of ethics in business and burnout, that people can only put off their sort of existential dread for so long when they know they're working for a company that is not doing the world good.
For
right?
sure.
You can think about all the other things. You can think about your stock options. You can think about the exciting technology you get to work with. But at some point, you're going to wake up and think, what the hell am I doing with my life? And I think a lot of people have been waking up, particularly in the last several years, because we're just coming out of the long honeymoon of technology adoration, right? For 10 years ago, 2010, people would talk about Facebook. Oh, Facebook is just this wonderful thing that allows me to connect with my family and friends. Isn't that wonderful? Isn't it just a gift to the world, right? Like in purely positive terms, with no sight of the trade-offs or the benefits or the downsides or the danger to societies and democracies. Or you look at a company like Google and say, oh, wow, they're just giving their search engine away for free. They're just giving us email away for free. They must be such nice people who only have our best interest at heart. There's not a lot of people who talk like that anymore, because we've gotten wiser. We've learned more, and we've realized that these companies do not have our best interest at heart. No company of that size, unconstrained by forceful regulation, which is completely absent, largely speaking, in the United States, although it's interesting, just as we should have this conversation today, the large lawsuit that was filed in the United States by the Federal Trade Commission against Facebook that purports them to be criminals in the monopoly realm should hit just now. But in general, there's been a shift. And I think that that shift is a wonderful development, that we've realized that big is not better, that ethics is not a checkbox you can opt into 5 years down the road. That having some idea of your place in the world being more than simply the biggest, eating the most, conquering the most market share, capturing the most customers, or even worse, eyeballs, is not something that is ultimately fulfilling for a lot of people, right? We're starting to see a growing number of employee-driven revolts inside these companies. In Google, in particular, some of these groups have been quite active lately in a variety of ethical manners, and I think this is a great development. There's a great awakening right now that big companies need to be constrained and restrained, and it hasn't happened for the duration. And now we're left with essentially a hangover, an ethical hangover. We didn't deal with the issues when they were small, so now we have to deal with the issues when they're large, and it's more painful and it takes longer, which altogether, I hope, creates a environment where new entrepreneurs look at these companies less as just these gleaming role models and more as cautionary tales.
For sure.
As in, I do not want to end up being damn Mark Zuckerberg, right? I do not want to end up being the leader of these companies, because that sounds like a miserable thing. Have you seen a smile from Zuckerberg's face in the last 10 years? I don't think I have. He's in front of a congressional committee every other week. It just seems like an awful life, really, from a perspective of just overall life satisfaction, but also from just a sort of sense of like, why are we doing this, right? Like, what other options are there? And I think the entrepreneurial sort of viewpoint opening up and having a broader look at, do you know what? Actually, what do I want out of this, right? Let me just not copy and paste this chase to become a unicorn, because that's a certain economic model that works very well for venture capital under a certain sort of strategy, but I can do something else. I can look at things and like, do you know what? Maybe I can build a great company that's 20 people, and I won't treat small as a stepping stone. I won't sign myself up for a death march that requires me to grow and grow and grow as fast as humanly possible, breaking whatever I can break along the way, because I don't have to. And even just opening the entrepreneurial eyes to that as an option is a huge win, because we've been on this default template for so long. There's one way to build a new tech startup. You come up with some idea, you build a minimum viable product, you pitch that to investors, you get as big of a valuation as you possibly can, you raise as much money as you can, and then you run like hell for 7 to 10 years. And as Facebook used to have it, what was it? I'm only remembering my paraphrase here: behave badly and break things. I think it was called move fast and break things, right? That this is not the only path. There's also a path of like move slowly and build things, move gently and don't step on things, enjoy yourself, build something that's actually good for the world. Like there's all these opportunities if we don't just look at like the sole output of entrepreneurship being return on investment, right? Like I think that is just a mental model that has been stunting the ethical outlook of an entire generation of entrepreneurs, particularly in technology. And it's so satisfying to see us come out of that absolutely abhorrent worldview that sees the return on investment as the number one priority and goal of entrepreneurship, rather than enrichment of people and enrichment of the world, and having a reasonable medium-sized place in it.
Yeah. How big, small is your Basecamp team now? Heard you've managed to keep it still quite small.
We have. We're about
now?
We're about 60 people now, which for me is a huge company. For a very long time, we were 10 people. And then in, I think it was 2015, maybe 14, we had a number of products. We had 4 products at the time. And we had a team that was about, I think, maybe 40 people. And we looked at those two things and said, they're not compatible. Our products are growing too quickly. We can't deal with 4 products having 4 people, 4 products having 40 people and do a good job of all of it. So the natural response, again, from a business trajectory would be, oh, you have 4 products, they're all doing well, and you don't have enough people. You just hire more people and you grow bigger and bigger and bigger as quick as you can. We did the opposite. We said, you know what? I'm not interested in working at a bigger company. I like to program. I like to write. I like to debate. I like to do a bunch of things that are not compatible with me running a company of 300 or 1,000 or whatever it is. So what could we do if we don't want to grow the company? Well, we could shrink it. So that's what we did on the product side. We divested ourselves of the 3 other products that weren't doing as well as our main product, Basecamp, and we doubled down on Basecamp. We actually renamed the company Basecamp at that time, and managed to then keep the headcount of the company essentially flat. We've grown a little bit, but not explosively in any sense over the next 5, 6, 7 years. And it's a very atypical response, right? Again, how could we do that? If you had gone to your investor and said, oh, hey, listen, we have 4 products that are going really well. They're all growing. Some are growing faster than others, but they're all growing. But we only have 40 people. We can't make it all happen. What do you think we should do? I mean, they'd look at you like you're crazy. What do you mean? What do you think you should do? You should just hire a bunch of people and grow the company. What do you mean? It's not even, why are we talking about this? Having the freedom from even having to have that conversation, right? A lot of people think like, oh, investors will make you do all sorts of things. No, they won't. You will make yourself do all sorts of things because you think that's what you have to do in order to please your investors, right? That's often how it goes. It's not the overt control. It's not your investor telling you exactly what to do. It's you internalizing an ideology of growth that forces you to, or not overtly, implicitly forces you to make certain choices and go down a certain path. If you free yourself from that ideology, if you free yourself from those constraints by not having those pressures on you, all of a sudden a whole new world of opportunities and choices open up of allowing you to do different things, and different things in a way that is not at all foreign to the world of commerce. It's just foreign to the modern interpretation of entrepreneurship. There's a very long, rich history of companies choosing not to grow as big as they possibly could, of the sort of the best chef in the world keeping one restaurant because they think like that's what they can do, not opening a whole chain of restaurants? Do you think the chef at El Bull, who in Spain was the highest ranked restaurant for, I think, 6 years running, do you think he dreams of running McDonald's? Do you think he wants to trade? He's like, oh yeah, I'll give up my culinary art so that I can sell 1 billion burgers. I don't think so. You look at any of the big educational institutions, Cambridge, Oxford, Harvard, are they thinking, oh, I wish I could open branches all the way around the world and make No, they don't. Many of the greatest things in the world are great because they are constrained, because they're limited, because they're not just trying to grow like a cancer and conquer everything. And somehow we've lost sight of that in particularly tech entrepreneurship, perhaps because it is easier, perhaps because it can happen faster, that these companies today can grow at a ferocious rate because investors have seen the kind of returns that are possible. They all go like, oh yeah, shit, this is what we all got to do because this is where the money is, right? Not realizing, do you know what? Yeah, I'm sure there's money in that. Do you know what? There's also money in all sorts of other things. The entire economy is not just that. And you can absolutely make very good money for yourself running a company of 50 people. Tell me how I know, right? Like I've been running a company of less than 50 people for many years. I don't have any material needs anymore. I haven't had those for a long time. And that's the other thing that I think entrepreneurship often misses. There's justifiably, for a lot of people, a huge demand to get out from under a state of deprivation where you don't have security in your basic living arrangements, in food, in education for your children, in healthcare. There's a huge and very human desire to get beyond those things, right? Yeah. But the thing is, at least as I was thinking about it in the US, you can meet those barriers in the grand scheme of big entrepreneurial successes quite quickly. The difference between having $100 on your bank account and having $1 million on a bank account is essentially 98% of all the benefits you can get out of wealth. The difference between having, let's say, $1 million in your bank account and $10 million is minuscule in comparison to the jump between poverty and being a millionaire, right? Is almost inconsequential. Yet the ways with which you can get to an entrepreneurial success where you can have $1 million in your bank account, huge variation, right? Like a huge opportunity to set your own agendas and do your own things in completely different ways. Whereas the paths to which you can become a billionaire, very narrow. Very few outcomes produce billionaires, right? They're basically these big, dominant, in most cases, monopolistic companies that in many cases don't actually help and enrich the world. So that's something else to sort of take in mind. I completely understand this instinct. You're an entrepreneur, you're just starting out, you haven't made it yet, and you want to make it, right? But realize that you can reach that point of making it where you're personally in a secure place where material goods no longer enhance your quality of life in a million different ways. And you don't need to have a big company to do it. So you can aim for something else. And I think then ultimately arrive at a place that is far more satisfying. As we just talked about, what do you think the personal happiness index of Mark Zuckerberg is on a daily basis, right? Like he's a billionaire. I don't think it's very high. I think his day is full of shit, right? Like things he would very much rather not do. If he had all the choices in the world, what is my favorite things I want to work on? Do you think Mark Zuckerberg wakes up most days and think, oh, this is it. Today I'm working on all my favorite things and I really enjoy it? Hell no. Do you know what? I wake up most days thinking, I'm going to work on my favorite things today. And you know what? I also did that last year and the year before that. Doesn't mean you always get to do all your favorite things all the time. No one does. But there's absolutely a difference where you can get to do your favorite things more of the time, if not outright most of the time. This is why I still program, even though lots of people who run companies, even of our meager size, the leadership retires from doing the actual work. And then they just do leadership, whatever that is. I like doing this. I like doing things. I like building things. I like making things myself with my own hands, not just through others. And running the company in this way has allowed me to do that. Why would I trade that, right? Someone asked me one time, it wasn't about Facebook this time, I think it was Salesforce. I was talking to some guy in the US. I think it was the CEO of Groupon many years ago. And we were doing this thought experiment. Hey, would you trade your company, right? Would you trade Basecamp for Salesforce? Salesforce is worth, I don't know, at the time they were worth $5 billion or something, right? And we were worth nothing of the sort. And he could not understand when I said no, that there is such a mind-washing ability of thinking like everything has a price. Everyone has a price, right? When the true liberation comes from the fact of realizing, no, I don't have a price. I'm not a commodity. I can't be bought. My values aren't for sale. And that is the sort of essence of a liberation from a capitalist straitjacket for your mind that kind of implores everyone to think that like, well, everything can be valued in economic terms, and they can't. And the satisfaction of your life and the satisfaction of your life's work certainly can't be. Now, it is one factor, and it's not an insignificant factor. And anyone who tries to convince you that it's more, I don't know, pure or whatever to be poor, they should spend some time being poor. It is not pure, and it's not good, and it's not happy, right? But it's not binary either, right? Like it's not between either I'm poor or I'm a billionaire. There's a huge span in between where you can say like, you know what? I have enough. That's one of the big words at Basecamp, enough. When do we have enough? When are we big enough? When do we have enough product? When do we have enough customers? When are we making enough money? And once you can reach that point of enough, you can start thinking about other things. You can start thinking about just maintaining. There's this over focus on growth in business today, where if you're not growing, you're dying, right? Like that's one of those common falsehoods, actually. Basecamp as a whole company has not been growing very much over the past many years because we reached a point where it was enough. And then we weren't interested in that. I'm not interested in doing all the things that growth takes. Marketing in terms of advertising doesn't interest me. Sales doesn't interest me. So we don't do any of those things. We don't buy ads and we don't have salespeople. Now that limits our growth. I'm sure of it. But that's okay. We don't have to sell to everyone. We don't have to let everyone know of it. Our company is big enough. It's doing enough business. Let's just focus on doing the things that we really want to do, because it also sets you free to just do things because they're fun. We just did an experiment that you could call marketing, but we really did it because it was fun. It's called dumpsterfire.email, I think it is, where we spent several weeks building a physical dumpster fire inside of a container that has a little printer and a conveyor belt. And then people could email an email address of something they didn't like from 2020. There's a very long list of things you could take in there. They would send an email to this email address. Our printer would print it out, put it on a conveyor belt, and literally transport that piece of text into a burning dumpster fire. So oftentimes, you know, that there's this meme about like, oh, everything's a dumpster fire. We built an actual dumpster fire. We had actual people build the fire, man the fire, do all the things just because it's fun. And you know what? What is the return on investment? Can I trace that back to a bunch of signups right away? I probably can't. And so what? We can do things just because we want to, right? Like this expression of human capacity and ingenuity outside the realm of like, what is it worth? It's just a more interesting place to be and a more interesting life to live.
For sure. And you have one flat fee for Basecamp. Why is that? Why is that?
Brilliant follow-up. That is exactly for the same reason. As in the price is $99. Whether you're now we do have some free stuff we give away for small plans, but if you pay for Basecamp, which is basically as soon as you have a business that is like using it for real, you'll pay for Basecamp. You'll pay the same as even a large company. And we did that for multiple reasons. One, very important, is we did not want to be beholden to our largest customers. We wanted all our customers to be equal. Whether a customer was using Basecamp and had 500 people or had 10 people, we wanted their support, their requests, their demands to cut for the same. What often happens at a lot of companies when they have variable per seat pricing is that the only customers that matter are the big one. You can look at a company like Slack or any other enterprise company. They all live and die on landing these whale accounts, right? Like selling 10,000 seats or 50,000 seats to the point that it perverts and twists the entire business to focus just on those customers because those are the ones that matter. Those are the ones that bring in the money. We weren't interested in that. We didn't want any one customer to have any power over us. This is particularly perhaps because we came from a consulting background where if you're consulting, this was a small consulting company for people, like you have a handful of customers, they all matter a lot, right? You lose any one of those customers, that's not great, which means that you will do whatever they say. We never wanted to do what our customers told us to do. We wanted to act on their behalf. We wanted to innovate on their behalf, not on their request, because customers, you know what? They often don't know what they want. They think they know what you want or they want, and they are happy to tell you what they think is true, but they want a faster horse, right? Yeah. And we're not interested in making faster horses. We're interested in making software that, first of all, makes us happy and solves our problems. And then we can find other people that are like us. And then also, because we just don't need it, right? The other thing that per seat pricing does when it twists the organization is it turns it into a sales organization, because the people who really make a difference on the bottom line are the salespeople who can land the big accounts. And I worked at an organization like that did enterprise sales. And I've seen the power that the sales organization have in a company that's structured like that. And I didn't like it. I liked a company that is driven by makers. And that's not to, I mean, in some ways it is, right? But it's not only to disrespect salespeople. There are some very skilled salespeople. I don't like sales. I don't like sales in the sense of trying to convince someone of buying something that they perhaps didn't really want. Now, that's a very negative way of looking at it, and it doesn't only have to be like that. But what I've seen over and over again is organizations dominated by sales end up being the kinds of organizations I would never want to work at.
Got it. And you created the programming framework Ruby on Rails. What led to that?
Need, my own, and a desire to use the most beautiful, most inspiring, most humanistic programming language in the world, Ruby. When I started working on Basecamp back in 2003, Ruby, which is a programming language out of Japan, was not very popular in the West. And when I discovered Ruby, I thought, that's a damn shame. This is a revelation of a programming language. It fits me like a glove. I fell in love with the programming language to the point that it turned me from thinking of programming as a tool to a mode of expression, a mode of creativity, almost like an art, like a dance, like poetry. And that to me was such a revelation. It changed the entire course of my career, to the point where I went from like programming as something that, as I said, was a tool, something I was doing because I wanted programming, to something I was doing because programming was amazing. Okay. And I felt when I then built something in Ruby, I built Basecamp. I had to build a lot of things myself because at that time, Ruby didn't have a lot of help to build web applications. So I built a bunch of things to talk to databases, to make HTML, to all these other things you need to do to build a web application. I built the tools for it. And when I was done, I had a whole toolbox. And I sat on that toolbox early on in its development. I thought, you know what? If this toolbox could get more people to pick up Ruby because they don't want to build their own toolbox. Most people are not interested in building everything from scratch. I like building everything from scratch. Most people are not interested in building something from scratch. They want to go into an environment where a lot of problems are already solved for them. Yeah. I should give that back. Ruby was such a gift given to me. It was open source. It was free. It was part of an open source ecosystem that also contained web servers like the Apache web server, MySQL, the database. All these things made it possible for me to start my business without being rich. I didn't have to buy a bunch of software to be able to start a software business. All these tools were available for free. And I felt just a kindredship to that movement that, you know what, this is good. We build tools, make them available to anyone in the world, and see what they can take it is amazing. In the early days, I often got asked like, oh, wow, now there's all these, and even more recently too, there's billion-dollar companies that use Ruby on Rails. You didn't make any money of that. Isn't that terrible, right? Like, what if you had charged money for it? Wouldn't that have been better? Does it pain you? Some people look at it like this way. Does it pain you that there are companies like Shopify or GitHub that are worth tens of billions, if not hundreds of billions of dollars, and yet you aren't making anything out of it, even though they're using your tool? No, it doesn't. It fills me with pride and joy. It is amazing that people have been able to build these things with it. I have enough, as we've talked about. I've had enough for a very long time. I've had enough for 15 years. I don't walk around with a chip on my shoulder thinking, I could have gotten more, right? But even at the time when I released Ruby on Rails, I didn't have enough, right? Like Basecamp was nothing. We weren't taking off, but I had already at that point internalized that, like, I'm not just here for return. I am here to be part of something bigger. I'm here to help inspire others as they have inspired me. I'm here to spread the good joy of Ruby, the programming language. So Ruby on Rails was my return gift to the world of software, to encourage others to use Ruby. And it maintains that to this day. Just today, we celebrated a new major release, Rails 6.1, with a bunch of new features. And I've been working with Rails now for 18 years, and it's as much fun as ever, exactly because it is not a transaction. I grow tired of transactions very quickly, but I don't grow tired of being part of a community of people who are intrinsically motivated to make their own lives better as craftsmanship.
Sure. Awesome. You're also a race car driver. You won the Le Mans race. Where do you find the time, the energy? What's going on? Like, where did that get squeezed in?
It got squeezed in because it doesn't have to squeeze in, because I don't spend my entire life thinking about work or working on work, right? When you work 40 hours or less a week, do you know what? There's a lot of time left in the day. When you don't work on the weekend, there's an entire weekend available for play. And I used those weekends to go race car driving for a long time. About, 12 years ago? Actually, it's a little bit more than that. 14 years ago, I sat in a race car for the first time, just 2 years after I had gotten my driver's license. And I fell in love with race car driving for many of the same reasons that I fell in love with programming. It is a gateway to flow. This state of being when you lose track of time and space and you're so engrossed in your activity that everything else just kind of washes away. I've felt that with programming. Some of my happiest moments programming have been in that state where you look up and like, wow, it's been 2 hours? It felt like I just sat here for 10 minutes. Race car driving has much of the same thing. It is so engrossing, particularly in the beginning when you're just learning it, because you know what? When you're not very good at driving a very fast car, you could get yourself very hurt or worse. So it has a forcing function where it diverts all your attention to the activity at hand. And that is just such a wonderful state to be in. So it was something I did as a hobby for a long time, and as a way of mixing vacations too. Once I got to the place of being able to race around the world, it was a great excuse to travel the world. For many years, I would spend about 2 months out of the year on the road, so to speak. I competed in the World Endurance Championship for many years and got to visit China and Japan and Bahrain and all of Europe and the US and South America, all these places where, like, okay, I could have traveled there, right? But maybe I wouldn't have, right? Like having an excuse, so to speak, to go around the world to do this is a wonderful way to do it. So there was room, right? That's the other thing. A key part of how do you make time for that? You just make room. You don't set out like, oh, let me make time for race car driving. I would never have thought about it like that. I said, like, let's shrink down work to a reasonable size. Let's call it 40 hours. Then there's room, right? You have to have space on your plate for you to even think about putting something else on there. And I like to have space on my plate, which is also why I say no to a lot of things and why I never travel really for conferences. That could perhaps be another good way to see the world. I prefer to travel for race cars, but then I do stuff like this, right? We can jump on a call. All I have to do is turn on my webcam for an hour and we can have a chat. That seems like a good use of time. And yes, it's still sort of a limited investment in terms of what it requires. So making time, having space, not filling up your day instantly with everything, your week with everything is a really good place or way to remain open. And then the other thing is, for me at least, race car driving has also fed back into both business and programming. You learn a lot about systems when you're trying to optimize how fast a engine with 4 wheels can go around a closed track, right? Like it's an optimization exercise. How can we optimize the tires? How can I optimize my driving? How can we optimize fuel load? How can we optimize all these other things? Which is just something that tickles the mind of a systems thinker, which I think of as the key sort of root discipline for both programming, for business, for other things, is to be a good systems thinker. How do you think about reinforcing loops? How do you think about factors? How do you analyze a situation? It all boils down to systems thinking. Which, by the way, if you're interested in learning more about systems thinking, I can strongly recommend the books of Gerald M. Weinberg. He has a wonderful book called Introduction to Systems Thinking that I trace many of the things that I enjoy most in this world, whether it's writing, programming, photography, or race car driving, back to systems thinking. And yeah, my
Awesome.
pitch for that book.
Awesome. We'll take one question from the audience. Yogita says, thank you, DHH, really enjoying the perspective. What is your view on one of the outputs of entrepreneurs being creating high volumes of jobs?
This is a piercing question that strikes right in the heart of a deep dilemma I have. Because on the one hand, I am fiercely protective of running a small company because I enjoy working at a small company. I don't enjoy being a manager for a lot of people. But at the same time, creating 50 jobs in this world, if there's something I feel a sense of, I don't think regret is perhaps the right word, but a sense of yearning for, it is that we could have done more, that we could have created more of these kinds of jobs, because we have tried so hard over so many years to make the jobs that we have at Basecamp very, very good, that it feels wrong that we can't have more of them. So that's in what I'm trying to atone for that, the fact that we have only created 50 or 60 jobs, by inspiring other companies who might create more jobs to follow some of the same principles that we have employed in our business. To inspire the likes of Shopify, for example, who, I don't know, at this point, I think are 8,000 people, to believe in remote work, to believe in these ways of working that we hold dear, these ways of communication, these ways of humane ways of working. And the counter side too, to push back publicly against nasty ways of working. I've been on the barricades very long for against workplace surveillance software. This is unfortunately a growing trend in a lot of companies. This idea that like screenshots are taken off your computer every 10 minutes as you're working, so that the manager can review your work afterwards because they don't trust that you're actually working. And I think these are just deplorable ways of being human to another, but also just deplorable workplaces. So yeah, it strikes right at the heart of my insecurities. I wish, in some ways, I do wish I was a different kind of person and I wouldn't have this affection for small companies, because I think there is more good to have been created if I didn't have that. And if we could have given 300 people the kind of jobs and experiences that we've made at Basecamp, or 3,000 or 30,000, right? You look at companies like Amazon employing 1.2 million people, and you think, you know what? If Amazon was a wonderfully humanistic, kind company, that would be great. 1.2 million jobs created under that regime, wonderful. Unfortunately, they're not.
For sure. You have an interesting way of handling meetings at Basecamp, and I know a lot of companies really have too many unnecessary meetings. Could you just give us a little bit of insight into that?
Yes, it is probably the number one technique for creating a more calm company, is to reduce, if not outright eliminate, the vast majority of meetings. And it's not just you take those things away, because those meetings, at least on paper, serve a purpose. They're there for something. They're there to tell someone about something, to present an idea, to do all these things, right? The thing is, you can do most of functions that meetings purport to do by writing. Writing is the superpower that every executive, every employee should be focusing on, particularly in a remote world, right? We wrote a book about working remotely 7 years ago called Remote Office Not Required, when we thought like, oh, remote work is just about to take off. Well, it didn't take off until this year. And now everyone is working remotely, many places in the world. And the number one transition they have to make to go from a company that worked in an office to work remotely is to make the transition from having meetings, whether you're having them over Zoom or Skype or whatever, or having them in person really doesn't matter so much. What you need to transition to is a way of communicating asynchronously, where you don't require everyone to be in the same room virtually or physically at the same time, because that's the thing that chops up the workday and spits out little work moments. And you can't get great work done in work moments. You need long stretches of uninterrupted time, and you can get those stretches if there's not a string of little meetings dotted out through your day. And the majority of pitches, the majority of status updates and information and so on is much better done in writing anyway. The joke about meeting often is you have to police people's attention when they're in a meeting, right? Like they're not supposed to check their phones, they're not supposed to, because you're so desperate to keep their attention because you can't keep it intrinsically, right? Because most meetings are boring, and most meetings do not involve all the people who've been invited to the meeting, right? That's why people get distracted and get bored. Versus if you write those things up, people can scan it. And I can write a thing up that's for the whole company, and someone where this is not relevant can read it in a minute and then decide, you know what, it's not relevant for me, skip, right? Versus if I'd called everyone into a meeting and blabbered on for 30 minutes, I would have wasted 30 minutes of everyone's time. And that's the thing about meetings too. A meeting is not just 30 minutes. Right? If you have 10 people in that meeting, that's 5 hours of wasted time. Well, not necessarily wasted if it was in a spectacular, amazing meeting, but most meetings are not spectacular nor amazing. So a lot of the time, the time is wasted. And that is the one resource that it seems like most companies are very eager to squander. So many companies are incredibly penny pinching when it comes to their funds, right? Oh, we can't spend money on that, or why are you buying that piece of software? But they think nothing of wasting 5 hours of company time by calling people to a meeting that isn't necessary. And I think it's also just a source of dread for so many people to be called in constantly to things that don't quite relate to them, that prevent them from making progress on the work that they really do want to make progress on, right? Because that's the other thing that is often misconstrued by poor managers. They think people don't really want to work. They think they have to police it. They think they have to enforce it. No, if you're working with creative, inspired people who work in a great environment, they want to work. They want to make progress. This is a deep source of human satisfaction, to make something, to make a difference, right? So to waste your time and be prevented from doing so because you're spending time in a meeting is an affront to humanity, to the purpose of people who work at your company. Rather than letting them be to it, make their own decisions about what's relevant for them and what's not relevant for them. And that transition to writing is of absolute pivotal important. We have, if you Google Basecamp Guide to Communication, we have a long write-up that talks about how we communicate at Basecamp without using very many meetings.
Awesome. Really, really great having this chat. So if you can leave us with some final advice to entrepreneurs, what would it be?
Be careful who your role models are. Reconsider who you look up to. Don't think that like a cover of a magazine with a big number on top is where happiness lies. You can build amazing companies that are small, that are 5, 10, 20 people. If you set yourself on a trajectory that allows for that to happen. Let's just leave it at that.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We're hitting the hour. We really appreciate you having made the time to spend with us, David.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for all the questions. They were piercing. Thank you.
Great. Sandras?
Great. Thank you very much, David. I really enjoyed this conversation. You're one of those people who feel like, look, if we had like more time. So much. I went through all your books like in a short space of time. It's like, wow. You know, a lot of time, it's not often that you meet people whose philosophy or viewpoint on life you totally agree with. And it's one of those, I remember one of the things that somebody complained about was that your books are straight to the point and short. And I was like, yeah, books should just be straight to the point and short. And people know as Startup Circle that we say straight to the point, short. So instead of filling it up with fluff. And somebody replied saying, look, it just saved you 3 hours of unnecessary stuff. So So thank you.
Constraints are good. And I write books that I want to read, right? Like I hate long, boring business books that take 3 blog posts and stretch them out to 400 pages. That is the worst.
Yeah,
So,
So
well, thank you so
very
much again for having me. It was really great.
Great. Thank you. So